بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. How many of you understood that? Oh, that's good. In the name of God, the most merciful, repeatedly merciful, and peace and blessings be upon His messengers. So I'd like to greet you with the Islamic greeting, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Which basically means peace be upon you. And this is the way that Muslims greet each other. It's a greeting which is well, thousands of years old. In Hebrew it's Shalom alaikum. So the people that you interact with every day, if constantly every day you say to them, Shalom, peace, it has an effect throughout the day on the way you treat each other. So that's one of the things you always hear, and it's always good to know what it actually means. So the topic of today is actually kind of funny because he said, what's your name? Isa. He said a topic which I actually thought was different to what I was talking about today. So who was initially supposed to talk today was Brother Hamza Sotsis, who's, as you know, debates for IRA, debates atheists, and on the rational foundation of Islam. And he just texted me this morning saying, I got the flu, bro, please come in. So that's why I'm here. And, you know, on the train, at the back of comments leaflet, that's where I made up the structure for tonight's lecture. So it's going to be fun. To begin with, I'm just going to give you a layout of what I'm going to talk about. The initial thing is what is Islam and what is atheism? I mean, if I'm going to talk about Islam and atheism, I need to sort of give the definition. Then I'm going to talk about God's existence and the need for revelation. Then following on to the miracle of the Quran, why Islam, why not atheism, and then ending with a summary. And I thought this was help me. To begin with, it's important to think about the existence of God. In Islam, we don't believe in blind faith. We believe in God because I told you so. We don't believe in such a thing. Throughout the Quran, again and again, it keeps asking us to reflect. It keeps asking us to reflect on the stars, the sun, the plants, how the rain clouds are formed. Again and again, it tells us to look at nature. So nature being the proof for the existence of God is one of the most repeated themes of the Quran. Again and again in the Quran, it asks us to reflect. It asks us to reason. It asks us to use our minds. Now there's many sort of arguments for the existence of God. There's the Kalam argument, design argument, fitra argument, so forth, so forth. And I like to keep things simple, so I'll just give a very simple example, and if anybody else wants to go any deeper, then in the Q&A we can do that. Probably the simplest example is, okay, let's just start off with something like a mobile phone. Now, a mobile phone is made up of the base materials, it's basically glass, plastic, and a bit of metal, right? Glass comes from, does anyone know where glass comes from? Sand, yeah? Where does plastic come from?
Petrol.
Yeah,
Oil.
You sound like you're from the Middle East. Okay. And metal comes from iron ore in the ground. So everything that I hold in my hand here is from the earth. It's just been refined and grinded down and molded into this phone. And let's just say you had this mobile phone lying around in the desert. Lots of sand, lots of oil, and possibly minerals and metals as well. Would you assume that over millions and millions of years, the wind blew, the sun shone, the camel trod, lightning struck, the oil bubbled up, and over millions and millions of years, through pure chance something like a mobile phone came into being? I actually normally speak at Hyde Park, and I'm used to getting heckled, so I don't mind if anybody says, no, you're wrong. Is it reasonable? Could that happen? No. It's something we think is irrational. Why would we think this is irrational? Because you can see it's something arranged. You can see something that's in order. And we know through our universal human experience that things which are in order, things which are arranged, need to have an organizer. So that's the gist of this argument. Now, if that goes for a mobile phone, then we wouldn't accept that a mobile phone just came around by chance. We'd say it was designed, it was organized, it was arranged. When our world is vastly more complex than a mobile phone, surely it makes sense that our world also has an organizer. If you look at, for instance, the distance of the Earth to the Sun, if the Earth was closer to the Sun, the Earth would burn up. If it was further away, it would freeze. In the same way, you have the Earth going around the Sun. At the same time it's orbiting, it's also rotating. Now, if this motion was to stop, or if this motion was to slow down or speed up, again, we wouldn't be able to live. Has anyone heard of solar flares? Solar flares. It's basically like the sun having a bad day, right? So the sun has a bad day, it lets out this thing which is equivalent to the last one that was measured during I believe 1980s, early 1980s. It was the equivalent to 100 billion atomic weapons going off at the surface of the sun. Now that energy, that heat was coming towards the Earth. And when it came to the Earth, the temperature just above the sky, does anyone know what the normal temperature in space is? It's absolute zero, minus 270 Kelvin. Absolute cold. Right? Now that temperature, which is normally minus 270 Kelvin, is absolute cold. When they measure that temperature 150 kilometers above this atmosphere, it was actually 2,500 degrees when that solar flare came from the sun. Now, why didn't that temperature come down to us and just kill us all? Well, the Earth has a natural defense mechanism, the Van Allen belts and the sky protecting it. So we don't know what's going on around us. These sort of things are happening all the time. There's so many things in nature which initially 200-300 years ago would have just seemed completely chaotic, like the ocean. Oh, it's just a body of water going around. But there's actually laws governing. There's actually something akin to pumps, which pump water from one end to another. And the moon actually affects the tidal waves. Does anyone know what would happen if we didn't have a moon, in terms of just the ocean? Does anyone know?
Like flood.
The waves would overrun the land. So this is just some of the order that we see in the world around us. Now, if we go back to the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang. Now, when we had the Big Bang, we had some initial conditions. These initial conditions, in physics, they call them constants, basically values. And from what we know, there's approximately 80 of these values that we know so far, that if any of these values was to change by the smallest fraction, we wouldn't exist. One of those is the cosmological constant. What it basically means is the universe is expanding, right? The rate at which it's expanding, if this rate was to change by what scientists call is a quantillionth, which is 1 to the power of 10 to the power of 126, something stupid like that. If it was to change by that fraction, we wouldn't exist. In the same way, we also have the strength of gravity, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and a whole bunch of other, I don't want to bore you with physics jargon, but there's loads of these values which are just right. And they're just right to permit a life-permitting universe. And if you actually study the beginning of the Big Bang, Imagine if this building here, if we were to fill it with dynamite. Some of you think you're Muslim. Oh, times are bad. But anyway, if we were to do that, if I was to detonate outside this building, I was to fill it with dynamite, and I, press the trigger, I'd give you like two options. Either the building all collapses, or the building, falls down and it rearranges itself into a whole bunch of little other buildings, or something else like that. Which is more probable? Sorry? Did you say the second one? You want me to come up with that? No, I think which would be more probable? The first one or the second one? Would it just collapse, or would it rearrange itself into a whole bunch of different buildings? First. It doesn't make sense that it'll just rearrange itself into a whole bunch of different buildings. So when you had this explosion of energy, which was the Big Bang, it doesn't make sense that from this explosion we had order. Now there are parts of the universe where from what we can see there is disorder. And this is what atheists sometimes use to try and disprove the order. But you can't use the disorder to disprove the order. Like I gave an example before, the ocean seemed completely chaotic a couple of hundred years ago, but now we know there's laws governing that. And just to give you a small example of the sort of design in human beings, they did a study here in, I don't know the names of the university, but it was a study to do with if you were to get a monkey to randomly type away for however long until he types the words from Shakespeare's play, I think it's Hamlet or something, to be or not to be. The monkey to just randomly sit there and type away elbows, everything. And for it to come up with the words to be or not to be, they calculated roughly how long it would take for the monkey to do it. They assumed, they had to make loads of assumptions here and there, but the value that they got was something around the range of 28 billion years. It would take the monkey 28 billion years to write something like to be or not to be. The rest of it would have been like jargon. Does anyone know how old this universe is?
13.7 billion.
Yeah, 13.8. I'm not going to disagree with you, police officers. So the universe is half as old as that. So in every single cell of our body, we have enough information that could fill out 500 books. In every cell of our body. And do you know how many cells there are in each body? Trillions. Trillions of cells. Each of them having this information inside our cells. Now, if this is pure chance, if a monkey, it takes him 28 billion years, twice the age of the universe, just to come up with the words to be or not to be, how does it make sense that all this information is within the DNA? Has anyone heard of the Human Project?
Human Genome Project.
The Human Genome Project? Yeah. The person who actually broke the code, because it's like trying to understand the code of the DNA, it took them approximately 40 years. He was an atheist at the beginning, and he became a theist in the end. A lot of the times, this argument, the design argument, is mocked and it's sort of pushed aside as, oh, okay, let's just say a complex being makes a less complex being, therefore God has to be the most infinitely complex being, therefore God needs to have a creator, so who created God? Well, actually that doesn't discount God in any way, because if I was to say, is this mobile phone designed? And Isa there, are you Isa? Or Isa there says, yeah, but who designed it? It doesn't mean I don't exist who actually designed it. Now, let's just say you had the thing, God created the universe, who created God? Another God. Who created that God? Another God. Who created that God? Another God. Who created that God? Another God. That is a rational impossibility. The reason for that is this. This podium needs two people to move it. And I want to move it, and I say, brother, can you help me move it? He says, sure, I'll help you only if he helps me. And he goes, sure, I'll help you if only if he helps me. And he goes, sure, I'll help you if only if he helps me. And this goes on forever. Will this table ever move? No, this table will never move. In the same way, if you had the situation of God created the universe, who created God? Another God. Who created that God? Another God. Who created that God? Another God. This went on for infinity, the universe wouldn't exist. This isn't my argument, it's Aristotle's. I'm not that smart. So do you see, even asking the question, who created God, leads us to a fallacious conclusion. God has no creator. The very fact that we exist is proof that God himself is uncaused. So to move on to, and there's a few more sort of contentions that atheists normally use for, God's existence on this particular argument, and I'm hoping someone here is an atheist that can bring those in the Q&A, so we can answer those. Okay, the next thing is the need for revelation, because there's a lot of people who actually do believe in God. They actually believe there is a God, but they don't believe that God contacts us in any way. And some of the philosophers of the past, Socrates and Plato, they believed there was God rationally. By looking at nature, they believed there was God, but they didn't believe in revelation, or, divine messengers, or something like this. Now, if I was to use a simple analogy, that if you were to make a factory, with thousands and thousands of people in that factory, would you leave that factory to run on its own? Or would you send to the factory a manager? Or someone with some sort of instructions? What would you do? I'm used to getting heckled, like I said, so. Would you just leave the factory to run on its own? Or would you send to the factory a manager? You'd send a manager. You'd send someone with instructions. If you make something, if I make this mobile phone, or if I make this bottle, even before I make this thing, I think, what am I going to do with it? What's its purpose? So likewise, God created this earth. It makes sense for him to send messengers, send people to have instruction, have scripture. And this is what we believe is, Prophet Jesus, the Prophet Moses, the Prophet Abraham. These are the people that came. Now, another way to think about it, that's why revelation makes sense. Another way to think about it is, without revelation, we won't know what our purpose is. If I was to ask what your ears are for, you'd say hearing. What our eyes for, you'd say seeing. What is our nose for? Smelling. So all of our organs individually have a purpose, but the whole body itself has no purpose? That doesn't make sense at all. So that's why revelation makes sense. Now, anybody can come and say, I'm the messenger of God. And trust me, you go to Hyde Park, you meet these people. They say, I can find God online, and you got all these other sort of nuts. So if anybody comes and claims that they're the messenger of God, they themselves need to bring a proof. By default, you can say they're a liar until they bring proof. Now, each messenger came to a certain people. When the Prophet Jesus came to his people, there were people who studied medicine. When he rose the dead and made the blind see, people thought, he's a messenger. That's miraculous. When Moses came, he came amongst people that were practicing magic. So when he came and he parted the sea and did the other miracles, people knew he's not a magician, he's actually a messenger of God. So likewise, when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came, he came to a people who were poets. People who actually spoke to each other. Sometimes when they argued with each other, they actually argued with each other in poetry. Imagine getting insulted and, the guy's rhyming at the same time. And you actually had this society of people who were poets. And when the Quran came, it was such a revelation. The structure of it was so unique that people could not match it in any way. But that was for those people. Even today, you have non-Muslim and Muslim scholars of Arabic who've agreed that the Quran has a linguistic structure which is unmatched. And the Quran has a challenge for anyone who doubts it to bring up any chapter, surah, like it, in rhythm, in its structure, in its linguistic, all the other characteristics that it has. And the best people in Arabic at the time were the people that lived during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, and they could not challenge the Quran. But that was for that time. Now the Quran is an eternal miracle. It's a miracle for today, and it's a miracle 1400 years ago. So what would you describe this era as? This century as? If that was the time of magic, that was the time of medicine and linguistics, what's this century? What would you describe this as? Science. I'm glad you said science. Someone said greed to me once. It's true. See, every century is a century of greed. So, in this century of science, we have a Quran in Uzbekistan which is approximately 1,400 years old, approximately. So, that Quran that we have, the same Quran as the Quran that we have today. And all the Qurans around the world are the same, the ones in Arabic, because the Quran only exists in Arabic. Once you translate it from Arabic to a different language, you can't actually call it the Quran. You can call it a translation. And from the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, till today, we've had a series of people who've memorized the Quran. In the world today, there's approximately 10 million of them who memorized it from cover to cover. And all of the Quran that they recite is the same Quran which he brought down, and there's no difference in that. And if we actually look at, that's the same book that came down 1500 years ago, and we actually look at the level of science that existed 1500 years ago, there was nothing. People thought the earth was actually on the back of an ox. They actually thought the earth was flat, there was mountains on each end which were holding up the sky. The mountains acting like columns. There's no telescopes, there's no microscopes, there's nothing like that. Within this background of ignorance, there was nothing there. The Quran has statements which we've only come to know in the last 50, 60 years. For instance, it mentions that God has made the sky a protected ceiling. And like I was mentioning before with the solar flares, the sky protects us from ultraviolet light, and it has many other sort of functions. Also, the Quran mentions that the sun rotates. Now, 50 years ago, the Quran would have been scientifically wrong. Because 50 years ago, they thought the sun was actually stationary. The Quran mentions the sun rotates. And now they know through more powerful telescopes that actually the sun does rotate, but rotates ever so slowly around its axis. The Quran also mentions the universe expanding. And it mentions something which is akin to the Big Bang. The heavens and the earth were one, and then they were cleft asunder. There's many other sort of things I can go on about geology, astronomy, and biology, and all these other sort of things, but I like to just keep things simple. We've got something like this, I believe. Do we?
Yeah.
People take away afterwards?
Yeah, in the bags, I think.
Yeah, so you can harass him afterwards to try and get some of these. So those are some of that's the scientific reasons that we believe the Quran to be the Word of God. The linguistic I've already covered. Another one of the reasons that we believe it to be the Word of God is the actual impact that it has had on human society. It is a book which came down. Is anyone studying history here? I'm not going to call you a nerd, just put your hand up. No? Okay. Now, 1500 years ago, not only in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in most parts of the world, there was huge oppression. The strong oppressed the weak. The women were seen as inferior. In some parts of Arabia, They did this practice of burying female children alive because they didn't want them. They had many other sort of ills in society, drunkenness and you name it. Within this context, this book came down. This book came down which united people on a common platform 1500 years ago. 150 years ago in this country or in North America, a black marrying a white or a Chinese would have been unthinkable. But 1500 years ago, all human beings were equal in that place. Male, female, black, blue, pink, whatever. They were all equal. And this revolution that came, it came because of this book. And this is the book which eventually led on to the Islamic golden times, or you can think of it akin to the European Renaissance. This is that book which had that impact. And to think that this book came down on someone who could himself not read and write. Michael H.R. wrote a book, The 100 Most Influential Men in History. Now he himself is a Christian. He put, I believe, the Prophet Jesus third and the Prophet Muhammad first. Because of the social justice that he brought. Now, does anyone remember, well not remember, but you know about the prohibition in America during the early 20th century. They tried to ban alcohol, but it just failed miserably. You had moonshining, you had people making alcohol in their bathtubs, and people going blind from drinking bad alcohol. It was very difficult to control these things in society. But one verse of the Quran came which made alcohol forbidden. It had such an effect on the people, it just disappeared from a radio. So that is the sociological reasons why this is also a miracle. Now to move on to why Islam and then why not atheism, then we can move on to the Q&A. I don't want to bombard you with a whole bunch of reasons why anybody should be Muslim. But one of the main reasons I believe is that we're all looking for peace. In whatever things we do, whether we're going on holiday, whether we're working, whether we want to have kids, get married, whatever, get drunk, we're actually looking for peace. We're actually looking for inner peace. We're looking for tranquility. That's what we're actually looking for. And none of these things can provide that except temporarily. To be in a state of non-peace, you see that? That was non-peace. I'm the one who should be nervous I'm not talking, but everyone else here was feeling a bit weird. That's the thing, it's psychology. It's actually something to do with humans caring for each other, basically. If I'm nervous, everyone else is nervous. If I'm confident, everyone else is confident. It shows the links that human beings have. So back to the topic of peace. The inner peace comes through, if you like, we're made of a physical body and we're made of a spiritual body. If we're physically hungry, and I try to get someone to sit down and explain to them algebra or whatever, they'd want nothing to do with that. They'd be constantly running around here, running around there, just constantly in motion because they're hungry. That's when you're physically hungry. When we're spiritually hungry, we do the same thing. If you were to sit here, not talk to anyone, not play around with your phone, not have anything to do for the next hour, just sit here, would you be at peace? Most people say no. Our spiritual body also has needs, just like a physical body does, and that's what the prayer is for. We nourish ourselves 5 times a day. Greedy people. Okay, to move on to why not atheism, the only reason I gave why Islam, there's many, but inner peace I'd say is probably number 1. Why not atheism? I would say I'm not an atheist because it requires too much faith. It requires too much faith that behind order there's no organizer, that something can come out from nothing. I mean, fine if you want to believe that, it's fine. It's just, it's too much of a leap of faith for me to do that. From an atheistic worldview, if we are just a blip, just here for 60, 70, 80 years, we came from nowhere, we're going nowhere, what incentive is there for charity? What incentive is there to help your common man? If we are just a product of chance, and even order is an illusion, what difference would it make if I reach out my hand to help someone or strangle them? In real terms, there is no absolute morality in atheism. Morality is subjective. So an atheist can say rape is wrong, he can say murder is wrong, but he cannot say rape or murder is wrong objectively. But a theist can. To give you an example, 100 years ago in this country, abortion was murder. Abortion was actually murder. Now abortion is fine, pro-choice. Actually, I don't agree with the term pro-choice because the mother has a choice but the baby doesn't, so I still call it pro-abortion. In Islam, likewise in Christianity and other theistic religions, we have absolute morality. So abortion was murder 100 years ago, abortion is murder today. And that doesn't exist in the atheistic worldview. And if you actually think of it in the smallest way, like this coin, pressing this coin will give you everything you want in life. It'll get rid of your problems, it'll give you happiness, it'll give you wealth, it'll give you everything you want. The only problem is you press this coin and someone around the world dies. You don't get to see them. Would you trust someone with this coin who believes in accountability or someone who doesn't? It's as simple as that. Another one of the greatest problems that we have is materialism. Materialism is actually the #1 cause of war. If you look back at all the wars, even if you look back at the Crusades, which had a religious tag to it, it was actually done for material gain. When the Crusaders actually went into Jerusalem, they killed Muslims, Jews, and Christians. It has nothing to do with Christianity. The Crusades was for a material cause. Likewise, Hitler with his Aryan race, he made allies with who? Japan, which are nowhere near the Aryan race. He wanted more land, he wanted more wealth. If you look at most of the war in the world that is happening because of material gain. The same reason why there's a lot of warfare in the Middle East, because of the curse of oil. And atheism has no guard against materialism, unlike religion, which it does. To move on to the last reason why not atheism, I'd say atheism is against fitra. Fitra in Arabic is the natural state that a human being has been created in. If I was to go from here to Japan, get someone from Japan, get someone from China, get someone from all different parts of the world, and ask them, is lying wrong? They'd say, yeah, lying's wrong. Is giving charity good? Yeah, giving charity is good. All across the world we have these common principles. These common things that a human being has been born with. One of them is the belief in God. All over the world you have people that believe in myths and legends and stuff like this, you know. In China they have dragons. In the part of Pakistan where I'm from, they have this thing called Gora Dunch, which is, it's actually quite ridiculous. It's basically your shadow keeps changing form and something stupid like this. So you keep having all these different legends in different parts of the world. And they're all different. When it comes down to the concept of a God, a creator God, and accountability and afterlife, you'll find it almost everywhere. In every place, people have that concept. There's hardly any language in the world which doesn't have a name for God. It's something inbuilt in human beings. Well, someone can ask, why do people reject God? Well, it's the same reason why people lie when they know it's wrong. Because people have free will against which they can act. So as a summary, I first gave the rational reasons, well, one of the good reasons to believe in God, the good reason to believe that He gives revelation, the good reason to believe that the Quran is the word of God, and how Islam is a source of inner peace, and how atheism cannot deal with the social ills that we have in our society. So I'd like to end it there, and if anybody wants to ask any questions, open up the floor.
Right, so we're going to move to the question and answer part of the evening. If anyone wants to ask a question, just raise your hands and I'll pick you out around the house. Brother,
Hi, my name is Ahmad. I'm a Muslim. I was once talking to an atheist and he told me, if you believe that God is fair and He's just, absolute justice, how can you condemn someone who's lived 70 years, for example, and sinned throughout this time for an eternity in the most devastating kind of torture, hell?
Okay. The question to do with hell, you have to think of it this way. 100 years ago, none of us existed, unless there's a really old guy in this room. So I can't say he's probably shrunk. 100 years ago, none of us existed. We were nothing. Nothing, let's say zero. Now we are something. Let's give it a number, 1. Can you compare something to nothing as a ratio? As a ratio, if you compare something to nothing, you get infinity. So we owe God, this coin's magic. We owe God an infinite amount of favors for creating us. And for rejecting Him, that's an infinite punishment. That's the answer I give.
So even if we were good all of our lives and never did anything wrong, then we'll still go to hell just because we rejected God. But someone believed in God and they sinned, they are more likely to get to heaven.
Okay, it's basically like this. Initially what you said was if someone was good, but they didn't believe in God, and someone that committed sins, but they believed in God. Now, if I was a judge, and they brought someone in front of me, and he committed murder, then someone said, oh no, but he gave loads of charity, so let him off. You wouldn't look at that charity that he gave, you look at the actual big thing. So in the same way, if someone comes who's actually not murdered, but he's committed a small sin, you're more likely to forgive that. But how can you say good and say not believe in God? Because that's the ultimate sin. Yeah.
Don't you think we're going a bit too far in linking miracles of the Quran with science? Because I'm not against it, it's just I'm saying we're going too far, because science changes time, what we believe today to be linked to a phrase in the Quran in 50 years might be an argument against us Muslims.
Well, we have to go with where the proof leads us, right? Now, like I said, 50 years ago, in the Quran it said that the earth is, the sun is rotating. But we stuck by it. We said that's what the Quran says. And science proved it. Now, there's another thing which is in the Quran. It's in, I believe, what's Surah 4? Surah Imran? Al Imran? In the fourth in the fourth verse there, it mentions a future state of the earth. All of the earth's water will disappear. That's a future state of the earth. It's not happened, but it's a future prediction. Likewise, there's many other future predictions which are in the Quran. And if somebody reads them and thinks, you know, this is not likely to happen, we have to stick by and say, yes, it will. We have to go where the evidence leads us.
Surah 4 is An-Nisa.
Sorry?
Surah 4 is An-Nisa.
Okay. I didn't know that. Yes, sir.
You said earlier that you said the age of the universe was so many billions of years old. Do you not believe the biblical account that the age of the earth is probably more like 6,000 years, and that God created the universe in 6 days?
But when we actually say days, sir, time is relative. So a day on Earth is completely different to a day on Pluto, is completely different to a day on Saturn. So to say the heavens and earth were created in 6 days, even before the and if you're relating that to the days on Earth, you can't, because the Earth hasn't been created yet. What we actually believe as Muslims is that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 ayam. Ayam is stages, period of time, and we don't say days. Some of the translators, they say days or stages, but in different parts of the Quran, it mentions a day being like 50,000 years, a day being like 1,000 years, because time is relative. So, to do with the Bible, what we Muslims believe about the Bible is what the Prophet Muhammad told us about it. He said, we neither accept it and nor do we reject it, because there's parts of the Bible what we as Muslims believe are definitely from God, and there's parts of the Bible which we believe are definitely not from God. To give you a small example, in the Bible it says God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days and rested on the 7th. We don't believe God rests. So we don't accept the biblical account of creation, no.
But go back to that word rest, it just means rested from. You know, he had completed, it didn't mean he fell asleep.
Okay. Well,
He wasn't tired.
yeah, no, I mean, there are a lot of differences, like God created man in his own image, right? Now, we as Muslims believe God is not some man sitting on a throne. That's not what we believe God is. We believe God is beyond space, beyond time, beyond our imagination. So this humanization of God, which sometimes we find in certain parts of the Bible, we totally don't accept these descriptions of God this way.
Again, I'd say that's just a misunderstanding.
Yeah, I mean, with the rest, with the rested on the 7th day, that is, I mean, I've never heard that explanation before, so. But the other things which clearly show God as being somehow human, those things we as Muslims don't accept. Sorry.
So I was going to say, the idea of God made man in his image, I think the normal biblical or Christian way of understanding that is not physical at all, but in communication. That we have a soul. Animals, chimpanzees, they look like us, they walk like us, but they don't. But they don't have a soul. They don't have that communication link with God, the spiritual link. And that actually is what was meant by God creating man in his image.
I haven't heard that explanation before either, so we all learn.
We believe as Christians that God is a spirit, he doesn't have a physical.
Okay. Except in Jesus.
That's right.
I mean, it's one of those, whenever you get enough Muslims and Christians in the room, you just keep hearing Trinity, you know. But it is one of those contentious issues that if, for instance, God was in a Trinity, whichever version of the Bible you read, constantly, again and again, you'll see references to charity, references to being good to your neighbor, and all these things which are quite important. The references to charity could be, I think, 50, 60 times it says that in the Bible. So if God is in a Trinity, it should be saying it again and again and again and again. And it should have been the same thing that Abraham would have came and clearly said, God is in a Trinity. Noah would have clearly said, God is in a Trinity. So it would have been repetitive, would have been explicit, would have been clear. but it's not. Do you see? So this is one of the differences between.
It is implicit in the Bible, but not explicit.
Yeah. Sorry, there was a question there about?
Do you not think science and religion are mutually exclusive?
No. I don't, because the thing is, especially, like, I don't want to offend any Catholics here, but during the Dark Ages, you had the Catholic Church suppressing, like, you had, I believe it was Galileo who said the earth is round and he was killed. Right? In Islam, we don't have that. In Islam, the golden Islamic era, which actually came because of the Quran, and the Quran constantly asks the human being to look at the stars, to look at creation, to study. The very first word of the Quran is Iqra, which is read, recite. And it's one of those common things, it's a name, and it's names of schools also. Knowledge is what leads people to God. There's another part of the Quran in which God talks about creation, the sky, the plants, and all these other sort of things. And then he mentions that his true servants who are in awe of him are those with knowledge. Because the people that truly understand the world, the remarkable world that he created, are going to be more likely to be in awe of God than people who don't think about creation. Reflecting on creation is, again, you almost see it in every couple of chapters in the Quran. It comes again and again and again. So it's not mutually exclusive. No? Yes, sir.
You said before that everything on earth has a purpose, like the nose is for smelling, the ears are for hearing. Does the Quran say anything about what is the purpose of the human itself, other than pleasing God and working towards the afterlife?
In the Quran, it actually it gives a general purpose that the human being has been created for, but also it has other things that humans being supposed to do, give charity and all the rest. But in the Quran, God says, "I did not create the human and the jinns except to worship me." Right? Now the jinns are another creation with a free will, but it's not to do with the actual. It's just one type of purpose. You see many other things in the Quran which you actually think, okay, this is my purpose also. This is my purpose also. But the essential purpose is what I just mentioned there. And this is what actually will lead to inner peace, which we're trying to find through other means, which we won't be able to. Because did anyone hear about the recent death of Madoff, the millionaire, who was involved in that scandal? He's a billionaire. His son killed himself. Now that person's a billionaire, not a millionaire, billionaire. He can go and not buy a property, he can buy islands. He has enough money to buy Bangladesh. Now, if someone has all the money in the world, if they have, whatever material gain, if they've got all those things, why would they still kill themselves? Because materialism will never lead you to inner peace. Yeah?
I just wanted to add to that answer that you just gave. He said that generally in the Quran it explains that the general purpose of the human being is to worship God, which is correct. But then, how do you worship God, and what is worshipping God, is an entirely is a topic on its own. Yeah. Worshipping God is not exclusive to the 5 prayers a day. That's not the only way of worshipping God. We could actually give an entire lecture of how to worship God, but to summarize it, I mean, a lot of things that you do, like giving charity or anything basically that you do for the sake of God, for the sake of good, if you do it with the intention of pleasing God, it can be considered worship. So for example, me studying here at university is a form of worship to God, if my intention is so that I can do good with my degree. So it's just
it's a very important point. I should have been more clear. People think worship is kneeling and praying, which is a type of worship. One of the also powerful ways of worshipping God is by study, by looking at His creation, by helping your fellow man. There's many. It's not, like he said, kneeling and bowing. That's not the only way of actually worship. Did I see you?
some people say God is so just, and why such things like floods happen, like floods in Pakistan between the 100 million people, or why does it allow such things?
Can you repeat the beginning part of the question?
If, like some people say God is so just, so kind to his humans and so on, then why do such things like floods, hurricanes, killing hundreds of people happen?
Okay. It's again one of the things I should have mentioned about purpose. The purpose of our lives is also to be tested. And that comes again and again in the Quran. We will test you through good and through bad. When God tests us through good, we're supposed to be grateful. When He tests us through bad, we're supposed to be patient. So these floods and these other sort of things that happen, if you think about it, eventually everyone's going to die. Everyone in this room is going to die. We're either going to live 80 years or we're going to live 20, 25 years. Now, each of us is going to die in a way. Some might die younger, some might die older. Either way, everyone has a just test on its own because everyone has a different capability, everyone has a different threshold, everyone has a different tailored test for them. So, whenever people sort of bring up this question of there's natural disasters that happen and all these other sort of things that happen, like the evil that exists, so therefore God doesn't exist. Some people use that to try and say God doesn't exist. But if anything, people are sometimes getting mistaken on the actual concept of God. Because if you have a concept of God who is all loving, all caring, and that's it, and then you see a dog gets run over by a tractor or whatever, you're going to question God. But if you have a belief that actually I'm here in this life to be tested, and that's my purpose, I will be tested through good and bad. Like in the Quran it says, we will surely test you through loss of fruits, loss of lives, and I forgot the rest of the verse, but we will surely test you. Every human being will be tested. That's one of the purposes of our life too. Yeah? Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask a couple of things about morality.
Yeah.
You've mentioned absolute morality before in the way that Islam is absolute morality.
Sorry?
You have mentioned before that Islam has got absolute morality, and then it stays constant. That's why I understood it. Now, morality is shaped by the society. Is that correct?
No.
In Islam, morality is shaped by God. Then.
Shaped means changed. In Islam, we have absolute morality in the same way that in Christianity we have absolute morality. If morality was subjective to the society, like you're saying, if everyone in this room represented the whole world and we had a vote, is killing rabbits fine? Everyone put up their hand, yes, killing rabbits is fine. If morality was subjective, it would be fine to do that. But we don't have subjective morality. We have, and that's one of the major differences between a lot of the people with atheistic worldviews when it comes down to democracy. Because we believe in people, obviously we believe in people power, but we believe there's certain limits that a human being, even if all of them agree, shouldn't pass. In 1940s in Germany, you had a general hatred towards the Jews. And it became a generally accepted thing to kill them. Now, morality, because it was subjective there, they did it. But if morality was objective there, regardless of if everyone agreed or not, they wouldn't have done it. Do you see?
I do. I just don't think that morality can be really objective. Because killing Jews in Germany was subjective, and it was good in Germany.
Yeah, if you look at it subjectively,
yes,
that's what it means.
But subjectively for the rest of the world it was bad. It's again subjective.
No, but then you just contradict yourself because you said objective. Let's just start off with a very simple example. Rape. Would you say rape is bad?
Yes.
Okay, if everyone in this room and everyone in the whole world said, you know what, rape is good, would you say rape is bad?
Yes.
So you'd still say rape is bad. But you just said morality is subjective. So we all agreed rape is fine. So you, because your morality is subjective, you're also supposed to say rape is good. If in a society you have the majority of people who say something against objective morality, and if morality is subjective, then you go beyond the limits. Have you heard of Sam Harris's The Moral Landscape? Has anyone read that? The atheist evangelist. There is no moral anchor in atheism. There is no absolute right and wrong. But in theism, in religion, there is. Yes, ma'am.
You know your initial example with the mobile phone, how like that's very logical obviously because you can't say if you left the mobile phone, if you left stand in the desert and somebody put it in a frame, you can end up with a mobile phone just there. And somebody picked it up and then use it to create it. So I can see your argument saying that obviously the world has to be created because it's so calculated. And that's the Quran kind of saying all of these things are calculated and there's all these constants that you said physics. But then you said that you can't, because of the whole mobile thing, you can't say that it's just natural. How are you saying that a person or a god, a spirit, or a power was just there to create it? Well, I know that it's not like an atheist argument. It's not saying you can't question where, if the table wouldn't be moved, like you said, if the person didn't help me. But if I say that the mobile phone could not be an accident, how can you say that God already existed and then created the world just because obviously you can't question who created God? Why can't we just count, rather than God being an accident and then one person who happened to be there and decided to calculatively make the world? Why can't you say that the world was an accident, but then nature on the world kind of evolved?
Okay.
And then you can say, okay, on the world, man made fire, then fire made heat, and then they came up with however things evolved, and people made telescopes to better understand things. Why are you counting a person who created the world as an accident, but not the world as an accident? So why don't you just stop the question one step earlier rather than carrying it on track?
Okay. The reason for that is if you look back into the Big Bang, when you said the world, let's just have a definition for the universe, the sum of all matter, right? Space, which we can define as up, down, left, right, back, forward. Space. This didn't exist before the Big Bang. Neither did time. It wasn't like the universe, it expanded into a vacuum. There was no such thing as vacuum. There was no such thing as space. So we can't say that the world was there from before. Do you see?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I think that bit kind of lost it for me. You can't, not as in world, I mean as in that there was nothing. A vacuum is still something. I know that
yeah, that's what I mean. A vacuum is something, but a vacuum did not exist before the Big Bang. It's not like the universe is expanding into a vacuum. A vacuum is being created as the universe is being created. A lot of people, they think, okay, why did you label it God? There is a cause, and the cause has to have an organizing principle because of the order that we see. If we do a logical deduction, we first say, you had the Big Bang, it's like a sound, yeah? Something which had a beginning. Now, something which has a beginning has a cause. That's a universal principle, no one disagrees with that. Now, that cause has to be able to organize, right? Because of the order that we see. That cause has to be free of time and space because it created time and space. Before then, there was no time and space. So the cause has to have an organizing principle, has to be free of time and space, and the cause has to be intelligent. Why? Because of the intelligence that we see. Now, that is actually a definition of God. You see, you can work backwards as well.
Can't you say that God is another name for accident?
But again, it can't be accident, it has to be intelligence. If you're saying it's accident, then you're just saying it's chance.
No, that's what I mean. I mean, how can you question the chance of some creator being there, but then you can't question the chance of an earth being created just because you see it being organized? Maybe before there being no vacuum, there was nothing, and then it obviously a vacuum started expanding into a universe. I mean, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, okay, but that last thing you just said, what comes out of nothing?
I couldn't tell you.
Well, I'd say nothing. I think that's logical. If there was nothing in this room, You wouldn't expect a random elephant to come out of nowhere. From nothing, nothing comes. Would you agree with that?
Well, in that case, it doesn't exist because you just said before anything there was nothing.
No. The very fact that we exist.
Means there was something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You see?
But that something can be an accident because that something can't have been created because that means there was never nothing. There was always something.
Yes.
And because there was always something, you can't say something has to have a beginning because that something could have just been out of nowhere.
Yeah, I never said everything has to have a beginning. I said everything that begins to exist has to have a cause. Do you see?
So that cause doesn't have to have a cause then.
That cause, logically, it cannot have a cause because we can't have an infinite regression of causes. Therefore, the very fact that we exist, the effect exists, is the proof of the existence of the initial cause, which itself was uncaused.
Something can't come out of nothing.
Sorry. Yeah.
You said nothing can come from nothing. That means that something has to have been always there. Yeah, and your definition for the universe was basically all the matter. What if you would define the universe as not all the matter, but all the energy? Because you can transfer energy and matter just likewise.
We are getting into metaphysics there.
No,
I will ask you one thing. When we say the sum of some, like universe has energy fluxes, right? Now, how can we actually say that energy was there before the Big Bang? We can't. We have nothing.
Something must have been there before the Big Bang. As you said, the Big Bang must have had a cause.
Yeah.
And you don't need to have God as the cause. You can just say that the energy itself.
Okay, let's just say you don't say it's God. You say there is a cause. The cause is free of time and space. Again, the cause has an organizing principle. It has power and it has intelligence, which is the definition of God.
But the intelligent and organizing principle you can explain just by chaos. Just by chance that there is the universe is so big that in so many planets that at some planet there must have been life.
Okay, but you know the whole universe is filled up with atoms. It's made up of atoms. Do you agree to that?
Yes.
Atoms are all ordered. So it's not just our Earth, it's the whole universe. The strong and weak nuclear force exists, that organize the atom, they exist in every single atom. So it's not just where there's a big universe, it's all in chaos and we're in that small part. The whole universe is made up of atoms, which themselves are ordered.
Can I just answer what you've been saying? Because one of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his companions asked the exact same question to the Prophet. He asked him, what was before the earths and the skies? So the Prophet's answer was, there was only God. And in the Quran, we define God as the first and the last. Like, before him there was nothing, and after him there is nothing. So I just thought we were getting a bit carried away about too much philosophy and what was before. The Prophet Muhammad answered this question for us. And the issue now is whether we believe in Islam or not, because if we keep on going in this direction, I can see both your arguments are not going to get anywhere.
Right, we need to start wrapping things up, so if there's any more questions, I'll take one more question.
We've got 15 minutes.
Sorry, folks, I'm just going to slightly apologize there. I need to go back to London, and London is a dangerous place after like 10, especially nowadays. So that's why, if anyone's got a last question, so I can get back on alive. Yes, ma'am.
What's the Islamic explanation of evolution? If you say atoms are ordered, is that not another name for evolution?
The thing is, evolution, change over time, is actually a process. Yeah. Now, again, when we're talking about processes, whether it's the rain cycle or another of these sort of processes. Processes, we can either say there's two things behind the process. We can either say it's chance or there's intelligence. And what I'm trying to show today is it's more plausible to say it's intelligence rather than chance.
Do you not think intelligence comes from time and experience, of which our ancestors did have? There's evidence in fossils and adaptation to survival.
No, if you look into even before the Earth, the initial conditions that exist, they existed billions of years, even before the first living thing was on earth. Where did that come from?
I wanted to.
Oh my God!
I wanted to make a.
That's a lot of time left for me now.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment while I'm standing here about someone's question from the back about why can't the universe itself be. Why do we need to go one step further to God? I think the key point that you need to keep in mind, which is something that he already explained, is that everything that does have a beginning needs a cause. So the universe does have a beginning. That's why it needs a cause. If you assume that the universe could have been that last factor, it's like saying that the universe created itself, which contradicts logic. But God, we say, does not have a cause. That's why it doesn't need to have a beginning. That's why we can stop there. And the other point I wanted to make is that sooner or later, you have to come to terms with yourself and acknowledge that the human mind is limited. So for example, I'll ask, can anyone here think of a sound that they've never heard? If you can, please let me hear it. Can anyone think of something that they've never seen? You cannot. There's a limit to the human mind's capabilities. So when you think about whatever that is beyond the universe, you can't even begin to imagine it, and we can't even understand it. That's why it is safe to say that the universe was created, but there's no point of even trying to imagine or trying to understand what is beyond the universe, i.e. God. We can only understand what God himself has told us about himself. That's the point I wanted to make. Does that sort of answer, was it your question? Yeah?
Just as a closing sort of speech, wrapping it up, there's awareness that might electrocute me. I thank you all for listening, and it's one of those things that to come to understand Islam, there's a lot more questions that are going to be on people's minds. There's a lot more, like some of the issues I raised today. Some of you might have some more things that you went home and you thought, well, that thing doesn't make sense, or I've got some more questions on that. So what you could do is you could contact our charity. What we do is we actually answer the questions of non-Muslims. All you Muslims have to wait. No, I'm joking. You can also ask the questions. So if anybody wants to take down my email, are you going to... Shall I just read it out? Okay, it's s.ahmad, that's ahmad, at IERA. You find a lot of people called Ahmad in Chelmsford. Anyway, at iera.org.uk. I thank you all for listening.